they're going to be around for a while. So it's about time that people got used to it.
Perhaps the best defensive lineman in all of football, especially right now. J.J. Watt is part of that defensive squad that defensively ranks third in the NFL in total defense and obviously second on the offensive side in points per game. The Texans are a tremendous team that still has faced a pretty tough first 7 games. Win 6 out of 7, you have a bye week, time to rest, time to get healthy, and then you face the Bills and the Chicago Bears in successive weeks. That perhaps could be the biggest game of the year in a sense, as the Bears at home, and right now they're leading 13-0 in the Monday Nighter, by the way. They're facing the Houston Texans that could go into that game 7-1. That should be a tremendous game in Week 10. Be happy to see that game on Monday night or Sunday Night Football. And certainly the Houston Texans on a roll. 6-1 right now heading into the bye. Same kind of story. Obviously, the San Francisco 49ers transitioning really quick. Another big-time divisional win. 13-6, flying under the radar in a sort of defensive game. Alex Smith did exactly what he was expected to do in this game. Obviously, the Seattle Seahawks, not the offense that we expected. On Thursday Night Football, the San Fran 49ers get it done at home, 13-6. Defense certainly wins games, and the San Francisco 49ers, as long as they get things going on that side, they should be a team to reckon with in the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, the Niners, it typically happens when you play the Thursday night game. There's so many other games that happen. You almost forget, regardless on how that game goes. They just fly under the radar because so many other games happen, and you almost got to look back. I know I did this week. I was looking around for the Niners game as these other games are going on, and I was like, oh yeah, they played earlier in the week. So obviously, not a pretty victory, but Niners, they don't play pretty football, so they're not too concerned about it. Here's another team, kind of like Houston. They might stumble later in the year, but if they have a good enough, good enough cushion, if you will, towards the beginning of the year, they could maybe afford to drop a game or two late in the year. And I think an interesting thing going on with them is the continuing, this isn't exactly something we plan to talk about, but they seem to be adding Colin Kaepernick into the offense more and more these days. And, he's a guy, I was a big fan of him coming out of Nevada. Alex Smith is the guy. I don't think there's any speculation on that. But I do like, here's a team, the Jets might want to take notes. You can orchestrate your backup quarterback into a game and it not have the whole world, coming down on you. They found a way, put the backup quarterback in, you're doing it right.
I'm not a fan of the Jets, what they're doing with their backup. Obviously, the Niners are doing a much better job. But over on Seattle's side, and obviously this quarterback is kind of, as much as you want to rally the team around him, he's a guy that perhaps, as long as he progresses nicely, is a quarterback in the coming years that can make strides and can help this team win later on. Obviously, Seattle is a defensive team, and they rank in the top 5 in that category yet again. But on this offensive side, that ranks almost dead last in almost every offensive category outside of rushing. The Seattle Seahawks at 4-3 obviously seem to be a quarterback away from going deep in the playoffs. And obviously Russell Wilson is limited and only scoring 6 points against the Niners, even any team, is certainly concerning. But are the Seattle Seahawks, they face a tough road coming ahead, but they do have some home games that even if they win those games, might be short of the playoffs. Is Seattle a wild card team, or is it another season that they end up short of the playoffs?
Well, I didn't exactly have Seattle going to the playoffs at the beginning of this year, so it's a situation, with them. I didn't even expect, Russell Wilson to start. I don't think a lot of people did. Matt Flynn was the guy they gave all the money to. So it was, with that situation, if things continue this way, they might be afraid to pull Russell Wilson because, you got to be very, touchy with those sort of things because, you look at that and you can kind of ruin the confidence. A player like, Javaris Jackson, the former quarterback of the Vikings, come to mind, who, coincidentally ended up in Seattle for a little while. You have a guy that you expect to be your franchise guy. What they do, they bring in Brett Favre, kind of push him off to the side, ruined his confidence. He was never the same player. after that. So it's a delicate situation. It'll be very interesting how they, handle it the rest of the way. So, we'll see what happens with that. But, Matt Flynn, point blank, you don't pay a guy that much money to sit on the bench. At some point, if they continue to do it this way, they'll have to move him in because you can't have that much money sitting on the bench.
And obviously, for Seattle, in a way, it might be the best thing just to have him off your roster because they've certainly gone to Russell Wilson's side. And I'm a fan of this rookie because he's having the maturity, and even though he has a very pedestrian touchdown to interception ratio, Russell Wilson is having those kind of strides, beating the Patriots at home in a big-time win and having those home game wins and certainly making the throws that you don't expect a rookie to make. Now, he's a fourth-round pick. He's very limited, and even though he makes the big-time mistakes, he's not exactly in the running for the Rookie of the Year, but this guy is making strides, and as long as his quarterback gets things done, he might be a guy of the future that Seattle will have. But after these wins, it's certainly disappointing if the Seattle Seahawks start 4-2 and don't make the playoffs. And certainly they're in a division that won't help as they also face the Niners one more time as well. Niners won that game 13-6. Seattle a tough road ahead. And the same is the case for the Dallas Cowboys. They win in a close game against the Panthers. And we mentioned that Cam Newton certainly not making the strides we hope to see from year one to year two. And obviously a sophomore slump. You could call it sophomore slump. I believe this is the beginning of the end for this quarterback in this city and perhaps even for his career. After a big-time rookie year, certainly the Carolina Panthers have a situation on their hands as he looks even worse this year by leaps and bounds. How bad is the situation as the GM is fired on Monday morning, and obviously this team at 1-5 on the year, things are looking terrible for the Carolina Panthers. And how bad is this quarterback situation?
Well, I think that's a little tough to say that his career could be at stake. It's a sophomore slump. We've seen plenty of these before, regardless of how talented those players are. And a lot of them, bounce back from that. If anything, okay, best case scenario, this is the biggest humbling experience that a guy like Cam Newton can have. Because, he came out last year on cloud nine. I remember before the season started, there was something on NFL.com. There was a 20-point bulletin essay on why the Carolina Panthers would win the Super Bowl. So there was that much confidence in Carolina towards the beginning of this year. I never really bought into it because you look at this team, Cam Newton blew up the stat sheet, and I think we talked about it on here. It didn't always translate into wins. Now it's not translating into wins, and he's not exactly blowing up the stat sheet. This Dallas game was a very, very winnable game. The Cowboys, we've talked many times on their struggles. They pulled out a win. This was a game that was pretty even. Carolina had more than one chance to pull away from the Cowboys in this game. So it's really interesting to see what they'll do the rest of the year. Obviously, Cam Newton's not going to get pulled. I don't care what you say because, Derek Anderson is your backup. It's not going to happen. That's not going to help at all. The only way, when Cam Newton, runs up on players, what does he do? He buries his head and he trucks through it. That's what he's going to have to do through the remainder of this season.
Well, this might be our first and only disagreement of the day, but I want to go into this Cam Newton thing, and I do mention a career kind of self-destructing year for Cam Newton. I'm a big fan of this guy. Very talented quarterback, perhaps the best arm in the league, but I'm not a fan of his ego, and I don't believe that this quarterback, his kind of confidence translates to the NFL, and after every game, press conference, head down, after every kind of a loss, just completely self-demoralized, and that's not going to carry his football team. You see the defense and the entire kind of squad fall apart in these games, and I'm not a fan of a guy. Let's mention, in that Thursday night game against the Giants, trailing by 28, you score a touchdown and you do a Superman dance. How much brains do you have to do that when your team is trailing by that much? I'm just not the biggest fan of Cam Newton. Obviously, a tremendous talent. And what has talent gone? How far has talent gone in the NFL? And also, Cam Newton, perhaps the biggest advocate of that outside of Ryan Khalil. He was the guy that posted the statement, but I believe it starts with the head man in Carolina. I believe that Cam Newton was the guy that kind of advocated that sort of message in the locker room. We have the chance to go to the playoffs and do something big. And right now, that ego has gone nowhere. And when's the last time we've seen that ego fail? Just last year when the Philly Eagles said, this is the dream team, and what did they do? I believe the Cam Newton kind of saga, rookie year, tremendous talent, but I believe that Cam Newton, we've seen his better years last year. It might be a sophomore slump this year and beyond.
Yeah, I think the most frustrating thing for these Panther fans, last year they didn't win a lot of games, but it was almost acceptable because they would light up the scoreboard and their defense just wasn't that good. And I think most people realize that. They lost games 40-43, but the fact that they were able to put 40 points on the scoreboard showed you that this team is going somewhere. Offensively, this is not a bad team. Their defense, there's plenty of problems on that. But you look at this, they have two Pro Bowl running backs in the backfield. Steve Smith, one of my favorite wide receivers. Greg Olsen, a tight end. They have playmakers on the offense. Brandon LaFell, as good as any number 2 in the league as far as the system that he's in. Here's a team on offense that should put up a lot more than 14 points a game. The fact that they did that was pretty embarrassing against a Cowboy team that, has been handing out free points like you're going to get trick-or-treat candy on Halloween. Here's a team, with this Cowboy team, I cannot stress how winnable of a game this was for them, and they just let it slip away, and you can blame that on Cam Newton. You can blame that on a lot of different teams, on a lot of different players, but overall, Cam Newton, I think the symbol, last year, if you took a still shot of his career, it was him with that Superman pose, and if you looked at it now, it would be him on the bench with his towel over his head, moping. I think that's, when you think Cam Newton, that's the image that most people get these days.
I'm a fan of Cam Newton. I don't want to go too far on the fact that he still is a tremendous talent, and it's ironic enough that in perhaps the most watched of Cam Newton's games, they only score 14 points, and the defense actually performs pretty darn well. And Newton had a chance to win a game and just did not get it done. And Tony Romo has seen better days as long as this offensive unit. I believe that Carolina certainly has a chance to do something good in the coming years. And I just hope that Cam Newton gets things going. But as long as this defense is the Achilles heel, I don't see this team going very far. And it was also a question going into the year, how far can the Carolina Panthers even go? Now, they were a team that they believed were going to the Super Bowl. I believe half the teams in the league already believe that. Just don't make it so public. But I believe for the Panthers, as long as the defense is the Achilles heel, and it was the case in the offseason, how far could they go with such a bad defense? It's showing in these games, and certainly nothing better for their quarterback than making the big-time mistakes. And he did actually play pretty well on 55% completions, but certainly not making the strides from year 1 to year 2 we expect. But certainly the Carolina Panthers have a lot to do after a 1-5 start. And obviously, I don't see the Panthers doing anything this year. And is Cam Newton going to have a rebound year in year 3 and certainly has a lot more on tap for year 2? Or do you believe, Phil, that he is certainly on the downwards trend?
Well, there was a lot of people that are saying if there's anyone that's going to, not have a sophomore slump, it would be somebody like Cam Newton. And, I'm going to continually compare Cam Newton and RG3 because here's two guys, all the talent in the world, and the difference is really just their attitude. I mean, if RG3 comes out next year and has, a subpar year to what we're seeing from him this year, people aren't going to dismiss him because, they feel that he's mentally tough enough to get through it. I think that's where Cam Newton struggles, is a mental toughness. Playing at Auburn, that season could not have gone more perfect for them. Undefeated season, national championship. What else could you possibly want from a team like that? And, he comes to the NFL. He doesn't win a lot of games, but it was still all about him. Win or lose, there was Cam Newton highlights on, on SportsCenter. It was all about him. I think it comes down to, can he be a team player, which is what you got to be to win rings.
And certainly the Carolina Panthers have the offense to win games, but the defense that does scratch heads, and the record that certainly they would hope to be on the other side rather than 1-5. Same exact scenario as we're wrapping up NFL goal line here with the New Orleans Saints. Now, 35-28 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. A lot of plays the Bucs missed in this game, and the Saints defensively absolutely atrocious in the